Where would the x go?
B.
All right. Does our segment B consist of two existing subsegments, 4 and 5?
Yeah.
It goes on the line that creates 4 and 5 out of our B. Right there.
It's 5 and 6. Yeah.
5 and 6. You said 4 and 5.
I said 4 and 5?
Yeah.
5, 6. Need an editor. Let's try the two-circled approach again. On the two circles, where does our x go such that it's in M but not S?
P.
Now, do you see what corresponds to segment C on the three-circle diagram?
7 and 6.
It's divided into 6 and 7. And they both exist, that is, they're not crosshatched, neither. So we have to put the x on the line that creates the two subsegments that we're calling 6, 7 out of our segment.
So it goes on the line
C.
of 6, 7.
Well, let's see, our conclusion says some S, so there's got to be an x inside of circle S. There isn't even an x inside of circle S. Neither of those are inside of circle S. So we don't have to consider the second condition. It's done. It's invalid. Doesn't even say there are any S's. You now know everything you need to know about the Venn diagram proof of validity. There is nothing in it. So we're going to practice it tonight and next week with a couple additional skills. I'd like to get them all in tonight. It might seem like a bit much, but that'll leave the entire class next week just to bone up. We want to identify formal fallacies that are committed by our invalid argument forms. A fallacy in general is any error in the reasoning process. And there are two types. They're either informal or formal. We're not concerned with informal fallacies in the logic course. We're concerned with formal fallacies, and that adjective formal refers to the argument form or structure. There's something wrong with the arrangement of the terms, or there's something wrong with the quantities of the propositions, or there's something wrong with the qualities of the propositions. So whenever our diagram proves an argument form to be invalid, we want to identify and name any formal fallacy committed. Your author takes you through these in the next section. (6.4), beginning on page 224. I think the author has 4 terms. I think the author has 7 fallacies, because one of them really is divided into 2. 7 fallacies. The good news is we're not responsible for the first one for reasons that you don't have to worry about. So that narrows it down just a little bit. Let's look at them in the order that the rest of them are presented in the book. The first one is called the fallacy of undistributed middle term. So it's been proven that every valid categorical syllogism must have its middle term distributed in at least one of the premises. Those proofs or summaries of them are given in the book. you and I are going to trust that it's been proven. So when we identify a fallacy, we can rest assured that the argument form is invalid. So in order to detect this fallacy, you have to know when a term is distributed or not. That's why we went over that. You now have to apply it. There's our AAA2 categorical syllogism that we diagrammed earlier and found it to be invalid. Let's see how it violates this rule and therefore commits this fallacy. You have to remember that whatever term letter is in this position of the propositions, it's the subject of that proposition. And whatever is in this position, whatever letter, it's the predicate of that proposition. They just happen to be S, P, or M to show how they're related in the entire argument. So we learned that the predicate of an A proposition is undistributed. Our middle term is the predicate in two A propositions. So it is not distributed in either premise. It's the fallacy of undistributed middle term. The first argument that we diagrammed tonight was the AAA1. We found it to be valid. That middle term is still undistributed, but in the major term, the middle term is the subject of an A proposition. And we learned that that is distributed. It only has to be distributed once, which it is. So this argument form avoids that fallacy. Questions? The second rule actually encompasses two fallacies that are real closely related. Now I'll put an argument form up here that commits both of those fallacies, so we can see how to detect it. What's the mood and figure of that, by the way? You should be able to tell me that.
A, O, E.
AOE figure? 1, right? AOE 1. You'll notice that I distributed the middle term in both premises. The rule says that in every valid categorical syllogism, if a term is distributed in the conclusion, then it must be distributed in its premise. So again, in order to detect either of these fallacies, you have to know when is a term distributed and when is it not. That's the subject of each of those propositions. That's the predicate of each of those propositions. So let's check for these one at a time. Is the predicate of our conclusion distributed? Well, that's an E proposition,
They're both
and it is distributed.
distributed, yeah.
So whatever else is the case, that P has to be distributed in the major premise. Here it's the predicate of an A proposition. Is that distributed?
No.
Fallacy of illicit major term. But the rule says if either term is distributed in the conclusion. So let's continue. Is our minor term S, is that distributed as the subject of an E proposition?
Yes.
It sure is. Here we find the minor term in the subject position of an O proposition. Is that distributed or no? All right, you guys, you've got to learn this, that stuff.
The S is not distributed.
I only teach the stuff that you need to know for the test. I don't waste our time on anything else. So you could take it to the bank, but if we go over something in class, you have to acquire it. It's going to be used. So,
No.
S is not distributed as a subject of a no proposition. This commits the fallacy of illicit minor term as well. Now, the author of this book calls it illicit process of the major term and illicit process of the minor term. We don't have to go that far. So our first three fallacies depend on your knowing when a term is distributed. The others involve your knowledge of quantity and quality. So you must acquire that. The next fallacy is called that of exclusive premises. Now that word exclusive refers to the negative quality. Maybe they should just call it fallacy of negative premises. I don't make up the names. But when a proposition asserts that members of the subject class are excluded from the predicate class, we say that the quality is negative. So this is really referring to two negative premises. Now I have a short way of illustrating how you detect this, a shorthand way. See if you can follow along what I'm illustrating here. This fallacy is detected just by the premises themselves, and the negative premises are the E and the O. So that right there represents the major premise is an E, the minor premise is an E, and the conclusion doesn't matter in this case. It's all about the premises. Major premise is an E, minor premise is an O. They're both negative. That's all you need to know. Major premise is an O, minor premise is an E. That's it, negative premises. Both O's, both negative, this fallacy. So you just have to know the quality of your propositions, any combination of E or O, E and O. That's all you have to detect. Questions about that? Only two more. This one's really wordy, but it sure does say it all. Drawing an affirmative conclusion from one negative premise. Most of the books say a negative premise. I like to emphasize that in this case there's only one of them that's negative. That's to distinguish it from exclusive premises. See, if they're both negative, it's that fallacy, not this one. So again, I'm going to use my shorthand method of moods, simply moods, to show you every mood that commits this fallacy. Major premise in E, that's negative. If their minor premise is either A or I, that's affirmative. So we've got one negative premise. And if the conclusion is either an A or an I, that would be affirmative. So I have a shorthand method here of illustrating, let's see, how many moods are represented in the shorthand method? E, A, A, it's one. E, A, I, that's two. E, I, A, that's three. E, I, that's four. In this shorthand method. Do you understand what you're looking at? Okay, well, there's more. Say the major premise is an O, that's negative. The minor premise is either A or I, that's affirmative, and the conclusion is either A or I. That would be affirmative. So again, we have four more moods indicated in the shorthand method. OAA, OAI, OIA, OII. So we've got 8 moods represented there. There's more. 4 more moods, all committing this fallacy. AEA, AEI, IEA, IEI. And one more. Oops. I think you know what you're looking at. Did you have a question?
So if there's a negative premise,
One of them.
one, there must be a negative conclusion for it to be valid.
That won't clench it. I wouldn't put it that way. It might be valid for another reason, but let's just say if you have just one negative premise,
Look out.
whatever else is the case, there might be something else that's required. But yeah, we could say that the conclusion has to be negative.
Okay.
I prefer not to look at it that way.
Okay. Look at it like that.
One more. Our old friend, the existential fallacy. Again, we could illustrate this in a shorthand manner. Your identification of this fallacy requires that you know the quantity of your propositions, universal or particular. The rule says no valid categorical syllogism can have 2 universal premises and a particular conclusion. So whenever that's the case, we know that it's invalid. So here are all possible moods that commit this fallacy. So in each case, I have 2 moods represented. AAI, AAO. EAI, EAO. AEI, AEO. EEI, EEO. In each one of those moods, we have 2 universal premises and a particular conclusion. So do you understand what you're looking at right there? Okay, your author has his own way of having you identify these fallacies on pages 230 and 31. It's this very complicated flow chart. I really think if you buy into my shorthand and you practice, we'll practice it a few times in class. It's a pretty easy matter. Okay, so we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll do some work on the dot cam. And now we're going to take arguments that are presented in English, translate them into our standard form, and then practice the same thing. Diagram a proof of their validity or invalidity. If invalid, identify all formal fallacies. After that, there's nothing more to learn for the test. We're done. Got 2 whole weeks to practice it out. So let's take a break, 10 or 15 minutes, come back, and we'll get back on it.